Dear Governor Holzmann, dear President Svoboda, dear colleagues and friends of the Institute and dear all participants. Let me welcome you to this year's spring seminar of the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies. This is a special spring seminar because we celebrate our 50th birthday and we are grateful that this takes place under the auspices of the Federal President of the Republic of Austria, Alexander van der Bellen, who couldn't make it in person, but he gave us his support via this message. I'm personally honored to introduce this celebration as the scientific director of the Institute, following my predecessors, particularly Professor Kazimierz Lasky and Professor Michael Landersman here in the room. These are the directors I know or have known in person, and also, of course, of all the previous scientific and managing directors, particularly Ms. Gazzari, also in the room, and Ms. Hagen as well in the room, who have successfully managed the Institute over this very long period in not always easy times and sometimes very difficult times, but we made it to the 50th birthday, and this is what we are celebrating today. I would also like to welcome you on behalf of the actual management, Mari Holzner on the right, and my deputy director, Richard Grieveson, of course also of the colleagues working at the Institute and some of the former colleagues also participating here, now being retired or moved to other institutions, but we are still in contact with a lot of them and they are still very helpful in various respects. Second, I'm happy that we can celebrate this event here in person after 2 years of pandemic, and I would like to thank again the National Bank that we can have this seminar here in this room and to provide us with these premises at the National Bank, which is a long tradition in the spring seminars. Nonetheless, we will build on the experience and technologies accumulated over the pandemic and use these new technologies of video conferencing and so on for our keynote speaker in the afternoon. He couldn't make it from the US and will give us his keynote via online, in an online format. As we celebrate the 50th birthday, let me give a very quick snapshot of the founding history, as some younger colleagues and some younger persons might not know what we're celebrating and how the Institute has been established. Actually, in the 1960s, already there existed a department at the WIFO, the Austrian Institute of Economic Research, called Department of International Economic Comparisons, Abteilung für internationale Wirtschaftsvergleiche. Franz Nemschak, who refounded the WIFO after the Second World War, already established at this time various connections with economists and researchers from Eastern Europe, particularly Czechoslovakia, Poland, Yugoslavia, and also at this time approached the Ford Foundation, and who also wanted to initiate some East-West research, not necessarily in Vienna, but in Europe. After a couple of back and forth steps, so the first contact of Franz Nemschak with the Ford Foundation was responded with a quote, "This is a Wiener Schnitzel with some sour State Department confusion on top of it." I'm not sure what was meant by the Wiener Schnitzel. A Wiener Schnitzel isn't that bad, but at least this was a not very helpful response at this time. Nonetheless, Franz Nemschak kept on track, and also with the initiative of another economist who left the war times in Europe and has been professor at Princeton, Fritz Machlup. He intervened quite a lot in the Ford Foundation and was very active to convince the Ford Foundation to find and support this event financially. So at the beginning of the 1970s then, this idea fell on fertile ground and has also been fostered by the need to find some placement for some displaced scholars from the East, from Czech Republic particularly, and Poland, particularly Friedrich Levcik and Kazimierz Lasky, and many others to find their place in Austria. And finally then, in December 1972, the Vienna Institute for Comparative Economic Studies has been established as an own institute, directed and headed by Franz Nemschak, who retired as the director of the WIFO, with his deputy Friedrich Levcik and Ingrid Gatzeri, who was very needed and very much supporting the institute, and later then become the managing director of the institute. So this is just the quick snapshot when the institute has been established in 1972. Let me come to a few points now. What else happened in 1972? Because this is quite important in also seeing the research agenda of the institute, and it's quite astonishing how close some events today are to those of 1972. I will highlight some of these events in 1972 and link it to the actual research agenda, which basically will show that a sort of long-term perspective and research agenda is quite needed, and importance of the broader global and wider European focus is very important, as this also has very large impacts on Austria and in Europe as a whole. So I will give a few points on what happened in 1972 in that respect. From a macroeconomic perspective, we know that inflation rates are rising again and hiking as high as in the 1970s after the oil price shocks, and that we might, or there's a danger that we again move into the stagflationary, or at this time even called slumpflationary period, which now might be looming again driven by these energy price hikes, driven by the disruptions of value chains, and driven by the cruel war of aggression of Russia in the Ukraine. Thus, a macroeconomic perspective, and particularly international macroeconomics, needs to be a core agenda, as this impacts quite a lot on European economies in Austria, but also in other areas of the economics like labor markets and employment. Also linking back to another event in 1972, a Nobel Prize laureate is quite known in this respect. Sir John Hicks got the Nobel Prize in 1972. Most of us, having studied economics, know Sir John Hicks. He was the one who put the ideas, or who translated John Maynard Keynes' ideas or theory into these ISLM curves. For the good or for the bad, we can discuss. And he has won the Nobel Prize at this time, together with Kenneth Arrow, for his contributions to general economic equilibrium theory and welfare theory, and of course of the impossibility theorem. Secondly, geopolitics and economic situation seems now to be as shaky as in the 1970s, particularly due to Russian invasion in the Ukraine. In 1970 also happened a lot of geopolitical and geoeconomic events. So, for example, US President Nixon visited China for the first time, and the One China policy has been established or enshrined in this year. Also, Austria, in May 1971, established the first diplomatic relations between China and Austria 50 years ago. Well, if you look at that more economically, China at this time had a share in world GDP of about 2%, and now almost 20%, which also sees that there's a lot of change in the geo-economic situation in the world. Another event has been that US President Nixon had a summit with Brezhnev in Moscow, signing two agreements, the SALT I agreement, the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks Interim Agreement, and the Anti-Ballistic Missile ABM Treaty, which was also signed in 1972. From a European perspective, in 1st of January 1973, the Europe of Nine has been established by the accession of the United Kingdom, Ireland, and Denmark to the EU. Unfortunately, as we know, UK has left 1 or 2 years ago the Union. And finally, in Germany, the basic treaty, the Grundlagenvertrag, between the Federal Republic of Germany and the German Democratic Republic has been signed. You see, basically, this international integration perspective unfortunately now also the disintegration perspective on a global and European scale, and its impact on trade issues, trade policy, FDI, value chains, EU integration, and also now the prospects for the future on further potential candidate states are very important issues the Institute is tackling and still doing a lot of contributions in that respect. Some recent work of my colleagues Artyom Kochnev and Marina Tverdostup in this seminar will bring some of the highlights of this research. Third, we have not ruled out climate change and have taken enough measures to avoid catastrophic warming of the planet. Incidentally, in 1972, the Club of Rome report Limits to Growth has been published, pointing towards this aspect of energy supply, energy shortages, environmental pollution, and demographic aspects. Also, for example, the first United Nations Conference on Human Environment was held in Stockholm. Some of these issues, of course, energy supplies, energy security, shortages, demographic aspects, related to migration issues, food security issues are very important areas which are on the core agenda of the Institute. Important to say, of course, that such structural changes go down to a very detailed level of industry and regions, and some of the colleagues are very in-depth in various detailed aspects of that, and do quite valuable research for this. Of course, the sustainability issue is still a bit of underdeveloped at the Institute, and we will have still to build up our capacities to do more on that. Finally, let me mention two other events which also highlight some of the important strengths of research at the Institute. Competitiveness and catching up in terms of technology, productivity, etc. has always been a core topic of the Institute for Comparative Studies. From a technological point of view, what happened in 1972, for example, has been that Texas Instruments put the first commercial calculator to the market so that you can do some calculations on your desk. So one could say that the digital revolution did not start in 1995 as quoted by Bob Soloff, but already started when wiiw was established and born. So research at the Institute addresses these issues on measuring the evolution of new technologies, digital capital, ICT capital, studying its impact on the level and quality of employment at a very detailed micro and regional level, and its impact on labor markets, etc. And finally, fifth point, in 1973, also a very well-known researcher got the Nobel Prize. It was Wassily Leontiev for his work on input-output analysis. And we're happy that the wiiw has contributed to set up such an input-output database at the global scale, what we call the World Input-Output Database in the big European project, which allows us to study issues of production integration, FDI, global value chain integration, etc., and has been taken over by some other institutions like OECD and so on. So these are just a few examples of how research activities at the wiiw coincides with some events in the 1970s. I'm not going over now the historical events since then, because this would be much too long, like the oil price shock, the fall of the Iron Curtain, the disintegration of the Soviet Union, the transformational recession beginning 90s, the financial crisis then in the end of the 90s, the war and disruptions in the Western Balkans, the introduction of the euro in 2002, the first accession rounds followed in 2004, followed by Romania and Bulgaria in 2007, Croatia in 2013, the financial crisis in 2007-08, followed by the euro crisis, the refugee challenge in 2016, the Brexit in the 31st January 2020, and of course, over the last 2 years, the global pandemics, and now this unfortunate, disastrous Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. So this would be much too long to put some words on that. So, coming to an end, these examples should have shown, and I tried to bridge the past with some of the recent developments, which are still at the core of analysis at the Institute. I think since the 1970s, the Institute has successfully transformed also to a very modern and independent research institute of applied economics, of a rather medium size, so we are about 40 people. However, with a challenging predicament, between, on the one hand, providing high-level academic research, data and evidence-based contributions to policy debates, and also monitoring and forecasting developments of more than 20 countries, 23 countries in Central and Eastern Europe, including the Western Balkans, of course, and also countries including Russia, Ukraine, or Turkey. Well, my colleagues, I think, do a very, very good job on that. So we will provide well-recognized assessments of these countries and forecasts. And congratulations to all in the recent years. We got a lot of ranks and awards from the consensus forecasts that our forecasts are quite well received and quite close to the reality, which basically shows that an in-depth knowledge of the countries we're doing work on and country-level information and institutions is very important for providing such a proper analysis. Of course, we're also, I think we're quite successful in the intensive competition for projects at the European level. Basically, we double the financial support we get from the stakeholders. And we are, last but not least, has also become successful in publishing in academic articles in high-level journals, but also, so we're very much doing applied work. Having prepared for the speech, I became aware that myself, I'm working now since 25 years at the Institute, so half of the lifetime of the Institute. And I tried to summarize the spirit of the Institute, and I couldn't find a better idea than to paraphrase a well-known quote from John Maynard Keynes to paraphrase the activities at the Institute. So I quoted like he has written about an institute. An international economics institute like wiiw must possess a rare combination of gifts. It must apply mathematics, behave like a statesman, think like a philosopher. One has to understand symbols and speak in words. Such an institute must contemplate the particular in terms of the general and touch abstract and concrete in the same flight of thought. One has to study the present in the light of the past for the purpose of the future. No part of man's nature or his institutions must be entirely outside its regard. It must be purposeful and disinterested in a simultaneous mood, as aloof and incorruptible as an artist, yet sometimes as near to the earth as a politician. But this basically, I think, is what the spirit of wiiw is, that we have, on the one hand, high-level research, on the other hand, we have to be as near as possible to the policymakers. So let me conclude with thanking you for coming to this event today and celebrating this 50th anniversary. Thanks again for all the stakeholders and subsidizers. These are stakeholders and subsidizers who have been on board since the 1970s, so particularly the Austrian National Bank, the Republic of Austria, the Ministry of Finance, the City of Vienna, which held a reception for us yesterday evening, and, for example, the Chamber of Labour and the Chamber of Commerce, to name the most important. Hoping for further support, of course, in the future we will, or I promise that we will contribute as enthusiastic and purposeful as possible to the economics policy debates also in the future. As the analogies with the 1972 has shown, the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies, I think, is needed for at least another 50 years. Thank you.